And I think we are in. So we should be live now in LinkedIn. So welcome, Bret, and hello, everyone. We'll chat for a couple minutes and see if people join us before we dive in. But we do have a lot to cover today, a lot to chat about.
Absolutely.
Um, and let's see, I don't have anybody coming in yet. If you're in watching, be sure to leave us a comment so we can tell. The platform that I use, I can't tell unless you leave a comment. And this is recording as well, so we'll be able to share it and review it afterwards as also. So no comments yet. We're right at 4 o'clock at the top of the hour. I posted this again a couple hours ago to see if more people would chime in, but I don't think there were any responses to that. So hopefully some folks will join us here pretty soon. Okay, we're at 4:01, so I think we should go ahead. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's have at it.
Yeah, let's go. So, welcome everyone to the leadership conversation, and this one is on the book "The One Thing." And I'm Kelly Byrnes, as you know, and this is Bret Getzel, and we are filming this on LinkedIn Live. Bret and I started talking a couple of years ago about leadership development, and he has a book list I'll share afterwards. I'll post it for everyone, and he. We talked about continuing development. So Bret was one of my students in his MBA class, and continued development after the formal program is over. So we started talking about different books each month, and we're going to schedule it through 2022. Hey, Mary Silva, welcome. Mary, you can put this on your calendar now, the fourth Thursday every month at 11 o'clock, and we're going to talk about a book next year. So it's already planned out, and we'll talk at the end about our next one in January. It's going to be called The Long Game. It's by Dory Clark. So, but the purpose is for continued leadership development. And Bret and I were big on let's get together, have a conversation about a book, not so much do a book report, and also to make it where people can join in and you don't feel bad if you didn't read it yet. So you don't have to do a book report either. So welcome in, Bret.
Well, thank you. Well, it's really really good to be back together. As you said, we
Yeah.
talked a little bit, but these things are always great to kind of come together and visit a little bit. And you kind of reviewed it for our listeners, but what our purpose is, and I think we've really kind of stumbled onto something here that there's this unmet need for leadership training, leadership development, leadership insights, and as I was doing my research and preparing, one of the quotes I found, and everybody that knows me knows I'm big on text, but CEO Harold Gannon said that leadership cannot really be taught; it can only be learned. And if you think about that for a minute, you really ask
Mhm.
yourself, where in your education journey do you learn leadership? You go through your undergraduate studies, and you've got your hard classes, and maybe do some of your humanities, but very rarely do you get that leadership training. There's a few of us that have had an opportunity to partner with very large firms that still have institutes for personal development and leadership academies. But for the most part, those things have kind of gone by the wayside as a result of cost. So you say to yourself, well, where am I going to learn about leadership? And it really starts to fall back to the individual. So, obviously in a conversation like this, we're not going to be able to give you comprehensive personal leadership development, but at the very most, we'll be able to whet your appetite and maybe give you some guidance, maybe frame a journey. And obviously, it's going to fall back on the individual then to take that and run with it a little bit. But I think it's a great platform to kind of start that conversation.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited to be committed to doing them throughout 2022 as well. So this is our second or third. We did a few this year, but I'm excited to have them planned out and continue our development as well. And so should we dive in?
Well,
Um,
let's talk a little bit about the reading list. I know you visited a bit about that a little bit,
yeah.
and as you guys know, I mean, I read extensively, and the value that plays both in leadership and team development really can't be understated. I know I'm an avid reader, and Kelly shared with me as I've got to know her how much she reads. You can see her bookshelf behind there, and I didn't really understand the value of reading and reading list until I brought this up in the presentation I made to Kelly's capstone course, professional development. And, I brought it up, and it was amazing the reaction that I got from everybody that was in the group. So, reading list and reading it as an activity plays such a big component of who I am that when I did that presentation, I brought as many books to the presentation as I could carry. And it was interesting how I laid those out, what I've read, what's on deck, and then maybe things that I'll read at some point later. But I didn't have a reading list at that time, but the reaction from the students was so overwhelming. When I went home that night, I got everything out and started typing them and obviously sent that list to Kelly, and then she was able to share that with her class. So I'm certainly not the first person to ever put out a reading list. I mean, if you Google reading lists on the internet, I mean, Bill Gates has got one. I mean, Charlie Munger, the COO of Berkshire Hathaway, he's got one. So there's not a lot. There's not a lot. I shouldn't say that. There are several reading lists out there. So my point is, it's not unique to me. But the point I make there is that reading a book from somebody else's list is, falls back on Dr. Cialdini's The Psychology of the Influence of Persuasion, this idea of social proof. In other words, if I've read a book and I find value in it, and to the point where I'm willing to put it on my personal reading list, well, you know what, you can probably be pretty safe in saying, you know what, I'm prepared to invest my time and energy into that book because somebody else has read it and let's say they vouch for it or they promote it. So I organized mine into a top 10, kind of a little shout out there to Dave Letterman, but those top 10 are kind of what I consider to be table stakes. And when people ask me, hey, if I should read a book, I'm going to start with those top 10. That's where I'm going to go first. And then I've got a second 10 and granted, I call those runners up, call those honorable mention, call them what you want, but they're good, but they didn't make that top 10. And then I've got a whole nother list that are books that I've read that didn't make that top 20. And I've highlighted in my list kind of the discipline, the principle, or the habit that those speak to. So I've got, as Kelly talked about mapping out 2022, I've got my reading list laid out for 2022. And frankly, I've got my reading list for 2023 laid out. Let's be honest, it's fluid. I'll pick up a title, I'll find something else that maybe I want to put in front of something else. But the bottom line is, we talk about commitment again, and this is one of Dr. Cialdini's principles of when we write it down, we're more likely to follow through. So I've written down my list and I'm demonstrating that principle of commitment. So I'm making a note here, on my list, I think that Kelly's going to publish. I just read Master Mentors, which is Jeffrey Scott Miller, who does the Franklin Covey podcast. Took 30 of the top podcast guests that he had, and they're all authors, and put them into a book, right? And obviously that's the New York Times bestseller, but each one of the 30 has written a book. So if you really wanted to get after it, you could pull a book title out of each one of those. I didn't do that because some of them didn't really speak to me, but that was another book that I went through. So one of the call outs here, as I read a lot of these books, the authors have a tendency to cross-reference one another. So reading a book by a given author, he'll reference the work by another author. And, some of the material's new, some of it's new research, but a lot of it's, really repackaged things. And not that that's bad. We certainly can refresh old research and refresh old content, but two of them I think that are worth a call out on this podcast today are ones that I think are probably the most cross-referenced. The first one is Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. That one is just about every author references that one. And then the second one, which I consider to be table stakes when it comes to personal development, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And I actually just finished it last week, pulled it out. I'd read it 25 years ago, and I thought, you know what? If I'm going to walk the talk and really invest in the content that Kelly and I are sharing, it's important that I sharpen the saw, as they say, which it was the 7th habit. And so I pulled it out and polished that off in about a weekend. So we're going to publish the list, and always looking for feedback. If there was a book that you read and you found it to be particularly valuable or any of those things, we're always very interested in that. So much of what we focused on today is personal development, and that's I think of that as foundational, right? I can't be a good team member or a good team player or a good leader until I first become the best version of myself. So as Kelly and I started to lay out where we're going to go, what's the journey look like? What do we want to talk about? We're starting with personal development, and that's much of what we'll talk about today. But then ultimately, you say, well, where do you go? Work teams is a great topic. I think that our audience would get tremendous value from. Organizational behavior, I think, is also an excellent one. And then we'll also, I think, at some point get to culture. And you look at those things, those are all foundational concepts, principles, and habits, however you want to frame that within the topic of leadership. So anything to add to that, Kel?
Yeah, right on. And I love you mentioning Seven Habits. That was a foundational book in my career and in my life. And I'm certified as a facilitator of that program also. I don't know if I had mentioned that to you, but I've trained many people and organizations on that over the years. So yeah, that's a great foundational one. And you're right that you have to get the foundational principles, practices of who you are as a person, because that's what you bring into leadership. So we're looking at getting leaders a foundation of who they are, and then adding some of the other leadership areas of responsibility and influence on top of that. So yeah, right on. Good stuff.
Well, let's pivot from that, and I want to talk just briefly about gaining content, right? And I read, and I also enjoy podcasts, and this is a little bit of a promotion for podcasts in general. Nothing that I've done, but just the idea of podcasts, and where I want to go with this thought is just this idea of positive messaging. And I think we can all agree that we're a product of the messaging that we expose ourselves to. And the thing that came into my mind is the Fox News, and I'm a conservative, so I don't hold that against me. But when you're pounded by a message, you can't help but absorb it. And there are several podcasts that speak to leadership, speak to personal development. And when I'm at the gym and I'm huffing and puffing away on the Stairmaster or the treadmill, I'm listening to a podcast. Two of the podcasts that I really enjoy, Franklin Covey has one on leadership, which is hosted by Scott Miller. And then I've really become a fan of the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast. And there are things about them, obviously, that I don't enjoy, and then there are several other things which I do. But just the continued messaging of culture, personal development, leadership, being the best version of myself, you can't help but have a change in perspective and a change in viewpoint when you look at the world through that lens and you say, well, those things don't move me. And I realize that. But when you do things repetitively and you're continuing to expose to the same type of messaging, you can't help but have some type of personal change.
Yeah, and what we are what we repeatedly hear and see and do, that all influences us. That's part of today's book of The One Thing. He talks about that as well, and the the part of the environment that influences you, and
Exactly.
the people, the things you read, the messages that you hear. Another one I'm a big fan of is Blinkist. It's an app, and Blinkist, and it goes through um, like book summaries. So there's a lot of books that come out that I don't think I'll get around to reading, but in 10, 15 minutes, they'll read a summary, or you can flip through pages yourself. And so I'm a big fan of that as well. So
Well, you're holding back on me, Kelly. You're going to have to share that one with me.
yeah,
That's
that's a
something,
good one. I
something
think
I might enjoy.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's free. You can get a free one. And I think the annual is, I want to say it's less than $100 for, and it's all kinds of books that are on there. And so there's some that are popular that I've heard of that I want to know about, but I don't necessarily want to read them. So, and then a lot of times I hear them on Blinkist, and then I do go order the book and
Of
dive in
course.
deeper. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well,
So,
hey, anything new going on at Voyage you want to share with our audience?
yeah, we're gearing up for 2022 and strategic planning meetings the week after Christmas. So, wrapping up the year. I just posted a blog yesterday with a little bit of a summary of the year, and the clients, the coaching, the I think I forgot. Oh, I don't think I put articles on there, but I published several articles last year as well, and working on lots of cool things for next year related to what we're talking about, centering the leader and who they are, and aligning their behavior and performance with their core values, and how they contribute to their organization and to other people. So, and then that contributes to the culture. So, sticking with our culture assessment and making that available again going forward, as hopefully the pandemic releases us to more to move forward, I'll say. So that's what we're getting ready for. What about you, Brett?
Well, I've got big news. So many of you have heard in previous podcasts and in some of the presentations I've done, was with Seaboard for 20 years. And in October, Seaboard went through a restructure, reorganization, and my position was eliminated. So everything, and I can't say this strongly enough, but everything that I coach, everything that I deliver, my messaging, my foundation, I'm usually the one doing the coaching. I'm usually the one doing the mentoring. All of those skills and all those habits, all those concepts, all of a sudden they came back to me. And you think of athletes and you use the term muscle memory, right? I mean, you do things over and over and over until they become a habit. And obviously in the moment I wasn't prepared for what happened, as most people never are. But I've coached all of my team, and I say this all the time: approach work every day as if it'll be the last. And if you ever have that last day, you'll be prepared. And I wasn't prepared as I would have liked to have been, but I was pretty prepared. But the next day, literally 24 hours later, there was really no question about what I was going to do, what I needed to do, what steps I needed to take, all of those things. And it was just a really, really amazing experience for me to be able to put all of this learning into practice. And, I think our audience probably skews a little bit to the younger side, Kelly. So, maybe they have or haven't ever went through one of these experiences. They're life-changing. There's no question about it. But I can assure you, if you're in the commercial workspace long enough, you will eventually go through a reorganization or a downsizing or a right sizing, a merger of some kind where, you'll find yourself displaced. And it's important to be prepared. Preparation is so, so important. So the point I make is, wow, all of this education and knowledge and training that I've had, that I've given everybody else, all of a sudden, I was using it all. And really, I think things are going to turn out pretty well for me. So not yet in a position where I can share all of the details, but probably in our next broadcast, I'll be in a position where I can divulge a little more. So that's really a life-changing thing for me. So I do want to share this is a conversation that you and I had where we were discussing some of the books we cover. And you made a comment that I found extremely enlightening, that you were more interested in authors that had actually done it, right? Who had lived and had the experience, versus authors that maybe came right out of academia, did the consulting route, and then became authors. And so as we look at my situation, I certainly personify that conversation. And the conversation that you and I had, I believe, took place well before this situation happened with me. So I'm really kind of blessed, I guess, to be able to share some of my personal experiences, to your point, with our audience, versus, some of those folks who maybe have never lived it. And obviously they're the folks that are out there, I guess preaching is probably the word that I'm looking for, but really I've never had an opportunity to experience it. So, let's segue here a little bit into our content today. And in my role, over the years, I was a regional manager at one point. And as a regional manager, I went from trade show to trade show to trade show. And I would set up my booth, and I would present my product and interact with customers. But the trade shows ebb and flow. The traffic's up, the traffic's low. Well, at one particular trade show, I happened to be in the booth, and next to my booth was the Tito's handmade vodka booth. And, when the traffic got slow, I went over and talked to the fella, and he was really, really conversational. He shared with me he was the 8th employee at Tito's Vodka. And so, we went on and shared a little bit about it. And I'm a fan. I get their mailers and their little trinkets and trash. Love those things. But the thing I found really interesting as we were preparing, any idea, Kelly, on how many products Tito's makes today?
Oh, 6?
They make one. So Tito's became a commercial entity in 1995. And so here we are 26 years later, and 26 years later, Tito's makes one product. So I think that's kind of an interesting way as we transition to our book. Our book today, got it right here, is The One Big Thing by Gary Keller. So I just found that extraordinary as we were preparing for our presentation today, that Tito still only makes one vodka. So this book is the 4th book written by Gary Keller. And people are saying, who's Gary Keller? Who's Gary Keller? Well, you all probably know who Gary Keller is. You just don't know it. So Keller Williams is the Keller in Gary Keller. And Gary Keller is the CEO of that corporation of Keller Williams, the real estate firm. And doing a little research on the web, Keller Williams is the largest real estate firm by agent, a closed sales volume, and units sold. So I'm not sure how accurate all this is, right? If it's on the internet, it's got to be true. But the bottom line is that Gary Keller, the author of today's book, to Kelly's point, has lived it, right? He's been a leader of an international organization versus somebody who's maybe came right out of academia and went down the consulting route. So I found some similarities in Gary's book. I guess I can call him Gary, to Covey's Her Third Habit, which was put first things first. And
Yeah.
then, I've mentioned John Maxwell, and he's got 21 irrefutable laws, and his 17th law is called the law of priorities. So, like I said, none of this material, none of these principles are all that new. They're just kind of repackaged, reframed a little differently. And it's amazing if you hear things once, twice, three times from different authors. It's amazing which author or which message actually hits home with you. So never a bad opportunity. But like I said, a lot of similarities to some of these other concepts. So the book is kind of broken down into three parts. The first part, which
Hold on, Brett. I'm going to add
yeah, go ahead.
I wasn't able to post a comment, so I'm going to add a banner that has a link to a handout. So if anybody doesn't have the book handy, it's pretty easy. Hopefully that will show up. Mary, maybe you can let us know if that is showing up. I don't know why I can't post comments with this. But Mary, can you, and anybody else who's there, if you would post us a note, then we'll know who's listening and who's along for this journey. But there is a handout that if you go to voyagecg.com and then go to the events page, it's right on that events page. The first event is today's discussion, and it says handout for today's discussion, I think is what it says. I think. December's handout for note taking. So if you do want a handout, feel free to go over there and voyagecg.com and go to the events page, and it's right at the top in that first event, December's handout for note taking. So Mary, if you grab that, will you let us know? And if you're listening in, please do post a message or chime in so we know. So we know who's aboard for this journey. All right, Brett, let's dive into the first section.
All right, let's have at it. Yep. So Keller breaks the book into three parts. The first part he calls the lies. And so obviously lies are things that we believe to be true that he would argue aren't necessarily true. And he has 6 of them. Everything matters equally, multitasking, a disciplined life, willpower is always on will call, a balanced life, and big is bad. Those are the 6 things which he opens part 1 with that he says are all lies. So, as Kelly and I started out on the journey, we kind of agreed that although each podcast would be based on the book, we didn't want to just simply, give you a book report. Everybody's very capable of reading, and we really didn't want this to be the cliff notes. So what we agreed to is we would basically personify or illustrate or demonstrate, the concepts or principles within the book with personal experiences. So what we've done is woven things into the conversation that we've experienced in our lives, we think that illustrate the concept or the principle that the author's trying to make. So in this first one that he's talking about, it's this idea of everything matters equally. And as I was reading that, the thing that came to my mind, and it's even in the text, he takes a section of the book and he talks about the Pareto principle. So the Pareto principle, many of you are listening and saying, well, what's the Pareto principle? You probably know it as the 80-20 rule. And that's, pretty common. A lot of folks talk about that. And so I said, well, hey, how do we illustrate the 80-20 rule for our audience? Well, being in the manufacturing space, we go through this, what we call SKU rationalization or stock keeping unit rationalization, wherein we take all of the items that maybe our business makes and we say, hey, you know what, in order to be efficient, in order to be profitable, we need to continue to limit the number of the number of SKUs we make. We call that chopping off the tail. And so sales, which is the entity or the business unit that I typically have resided in, gets emotional about the product, right? We get emotional about selling those products to our customers. So as the companies bring those products on, we invest our time and our effort and our energy into getting those items placed and aligned with customers. And then for the company to come behind us at some point and say, hey, we're going to take that item away, it's pretty devastating. And so, but as Keller makes this point, of, hey, what, everything matters equally. Now it really doesn't. And the point he's making there is you have 2 items, they're both not equal. And when you look at them through different lenses, whatever your KPI is, we can certainly agree, if we're very objective, that one of them probably needs to go. And I think that was what this point particularly brought to me, in that, what, the statement that everything matters equally, now things don't matter equally. And in this period of supply chain disruption, the SKU rationalization and everything not mattering equally definitely is hit home for me.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, same. And the when you're trying to decide which action to take, which priority to complete, which person to say yes to or no to. It's not the same. So I love that as the first lie, the first myth. The second one is on multitasking. And on that one, he talks in the book about juggling. And we think we're juggling and we think we're good at it, but there's all kinds of research in the book about that where our brains are not made to do that. And we're not really juggling. Coincidentally, I had researched this 10 years ago and wrote about it and traveled around the country and did a talk of the art of not multitasking, because we were so bad at it, but there's so much pressure to do it. And instead of juggling, I look at it as plate spinning. So, in the circus, there's jugglers and then there's people spinning the plates. Those are two different skill sets. And when you're trying to do high quality work for high performance, for high service, you're not going to be good if you're just doing the minimum to keep things afloat. That's just not an effective use of your time, or not going to lead to the best performance. So I love that he included that as a myth, or as a lie, so we would stop having that expectation of ourselves. And I had so many examples that I didn't pick one, but there were so many times when I'm focused on something and then the phone rings, or these days being at home, my dog just came in, my husband will come by and get interrupted, say yes, start doing something else. That's when I make a mistake. So I've certainly found that to be the case for multitasking. So I'm in the mode of trying to just stay focused, finish what I'm doing, and then take a break, or then do whatever else I need to do.
I love that, Kelly. Those are great examples. Fantastic. So let's move on to the third point. And the third point, and this is a lie, right? So keep that lens in mind. But the third is a disciplined life. And right from the text, it says you don't need to be a disciplined person to be successful. In fact, you can become successful with less discipline than you think, for one simple reason. Success is about doing the right thing, not about doing everything right. So that's a powerful statement, and we don't need to repeat it, but it's the idea of doing the right thing rather than doing everything. And so a few years ago, I worked with a consultant company that came into my former employer, and the employer was looking to implement a very expensive software package. And for those of you who have worked in consulting, right, it's always, you ask a lot of questions. And the consultants obviously had free range to our company and got to talk to everybody within the value chain, from the entry level folks all the way to the CEO. And their practice or their tactic was really to jot down or journal everything that these people did. And after they took and put it into a pretty extensive executive summary, they brought it back to us senior leaders and said, "Here, this is what we found." And it was really enlightening, and it was really eye-opening to us to hear from a third party, somebody who wasn't kind of in the fray, if you will, all the things that our people were doing. And one of the things that particularly resonated with me was they asked a certain employee, they said, "Well, why do you do that?" And they said, "Well, the person that was in this job before me, they did it that way." And really, I think what the message that came out to me was, what people do things without even really understanding what the value is.
Mm-hmm.
And we go back to what our statement was. It says, success is about doing the right thing, not about doing everything. And really, I think this experience that I had with these consultants really kind of burned that into my brain, and saying, hey, you know what, it's about doing the right thing versus doing everything. Because this sounds a little bit, as I was preparing this, if you're a fan of Simon Sinek, the Know Your Why, and you can think about folks that really haven't been exposed to that principle of just doing things because. And when you ask people, well, why are you doing that? And who are the downstream stakeholders that get value from that task? And if they don't know, you know what? And we used to joke about it when I was in the commercial space about, if I stopped sending a report, how long would it take before somebody spoke up and said, I'm not getting that report? Well, if nobody speaks up, that tells you that what you're doing wasn't bringing any value.
Yeah. And it might have brought value 10 years ago when the person before you started doing it, but times are different, people are different. And I call them sacred cows with my clients, and getting them to list some of those and pay attention to them. And I had a CEO tell me once years ago that, well, once we make a decision to do something, we're really smart. We've analyzed it. We want to just keep doing it. We don't want to have to face that decision again. Like, yeah, well, you haven't changed, but everything else has changed.
Good
So
point.
staying disciplined to be disciplined, that's a big lie. The next one on his list in the book is on willpower. And I love what he talked about, the example of with your cell phone having the bars for how much battery is left, and thinking about willpower like that, because willpower gets beaten out of us during the day and with our energy. So he talks in the book about being aware of your energy. And he doesn't share this example, I don't think, but one that I know is common is at the grocery store. And, I go to the store with my list and I'm going to buy fruits and vegetables and all the good things. And they're at the front. And you shouldn't go down the aisles. You should just stay on the outside. But these snack companies are pretty aware now. They started putting more snacks, or it seems like I just see all the food I like now is on the end. Ho-hos were on the end the other day. I probably haven't had one of those in 25 or 30 years. But, you say no to that. You say no to that. You say no. After a while, your energy to say no to those things gets beaten down. So then you just give in. And so in the book, he talks about staying aware of what your energy is throughout your day and being deliberate about it. I'm such a big fan of that, of being deliberate about taking care of your motivation and your energy. So before you're going on your fifth Zoom call of the day, go take a quick walk, get outside, get some sunshine, get some energy, do 10 jumping jacks, do something to keep your energy up. And that ties back into the willpower to do your best, to perform your best, to do the things that you want to do. But willpower isn't just always available to us all the time. That's the big lie.
No, completely agree. I think those are great
Yeah.
illustrations. So the next point he makes, and again, these are lies, right, is a balanced life. And there's so much buzz right now about work-life balance. And,
Yeah.
I started doing a little bit of research on this one, and Bezos has got a ton of information out there. He says, if I'm happy at work, I come home with tremendous energy. And he says, and if I'm happy at home, I go to work with tremendous energy. And he says, you never want to be the guy that's got a coworker that walks into a room and the air goes out of the room, or he drains all the energy out of the room. He says,
A vampire, energy vampire.
yeah, I've never heard that, but that's
Yeah.
true. He says you want to come into the office and give everybody a kick in their step. So I'm completely aligned with Bezos in this, in that, that there's no such thing as being a 9-to-5 overachiever. And I used to coach my team. I would say to them all the time, if you expect to be paid six figures, a company or the business or your employer has a right to expect six figures of output. So, and I think that's the environment that we live in today. And so, again, a balanced life looked at through the lens of a lie. So the last lie that he has in section 1 here is called big is bad. And again, remember, this is a lie. And this one looked to me a little bit like Covey's second habit, which is begin with the end in mind. And I'll put my own personal spin on this. You really kind of boil it down to dream big. And I think in order to be able to think big and be big, you got to dream big. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking something similar about this. And the way they illustrated it was, you guys remember the Jetsons? I'm pretty old, so I don't know if everybody on the call remembers the Jetsons, but the Jetsons.
They do, because it's been on Nick at Night, so they would know.
Oh, is that right?
Matthew's here. Matthew, do you know the Jetsons?
Well, I didn't realize this, but I had to go back and look, because I knew as a kid I was watching reruns of the Jetsons, but it actually launched in 1962. And some of the things, not all of them, but some of the things that were in the Jetsons have kind of come true. And one of the things that they had was George Jetson, who was the father, the patriarch in the cartoon, had a watch where he could make calls. Well, we've all got, Apple watches today where we can make calls. And the point here that kind of ties this back to the big lie of big is bad is the fact that somebody had to dream big, right? Somebody first had to dream big to be able to put it in the cartoon, but then somebody sitting at home, who was probably a young person at that time, said, you know what, I'm going to try that. I'm going to do that. And they had to dream big. And you think of all the things and all the technology and all the things that we have today, and it's all a function of dreaming big. So I'm not always aligned with everything the authors have, all their content, all their principles, but I can tell everybody on the call today that I'm really aligned with this. And I coach my girls. They're early adults. They're in their 20s. But I say, if you put a stretch goal out there, if you dream big and you come up short, I can assure you that you will have accomplished a whole lot more than had you not set that stretch goal in the beginning. So, going after the low hanging fruit, yeah, we like that. Those are quick wins in business. but you've got to have those stretch goals both personally and professionally. And so again, the lie was big is bad. And I would certainly say, yep, that's a lie. Big is great. Dream as big as
Yeah.
you possibly can. And if you come up a little bit short, you know what, you will have accomplished great things.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
So
Let's
let's
talk
move on
about
to
some
part
truths.
2. And part 2, he breaks that down into 3 sections. And the sections are the focusing question, the success habits, and the path to great answers. So, I think the takeaway here is, what's the one thing I should be doing that everything else is easier or unnecessary? And that really is the fundamental premise of the book. So, Kelly and I did a little bit of prep work on this stuff, and we said, you know what, it's more than planning. And I think naturally people get into their Franklin planner or their Outlook or whatever time management tool you use. But I think Keller really is challenging us to say, hey, this is more about planning. It's planning with prioritization. And I think a lot of us are probably okay, maybe even good at planning. But then when you layer on that additional concept, that additional principle of prioritizing, I think it takes planning to a whole new level. And I think that's what our author here is really trying to do here. So let's move on. So I was part of a strategy development project. I think that's the best way, at my former employer. And what our CEO at the time did is he broke the ELT team down and said, hey, we're going to do a deep dive into each of these components of the company such that we can lay out a strategy plan of where we want the business to be in 5 years. And this is under the topic of focusing questions. And so we developed 9 functional work teams, kind of an interesting concept there, work teams. And we interviewed customers, we interviewed competitors, looked internally, looked externally, looked for industry data folks, trade magazines, you name it. But I mean, we turned the world over on each of these 9 categories. And once we had it all done, we brought in everybody in these teams into Kansas City, and each team had a half an hour to present their findings. And my team had data, we had charts, we had videos, we had testimonials. We were prepared. I mean, we had it all. And so I obviously was the lead for my team and went through the presentation and saved 5 minutes for questions and answers at the end. And went to the audience, and one of the members of the EL team said, hey, great presentation, but if you could do one thing, what would you do? And my response was, build a bacon plant. And it was, and the funny part about it is I was preparing. I don't know, and I haven't had a chance to connect with that individual if he'd ever read the book. But, it was kind of like that punch in the gut to say, hey, what's the one thing that you could do, obviously, after 6 months of research and customer interviews and presentations, to cook it down to say, hey, give me one thing. And obviously that personifies the book almost as well as anything could. So kind of an interesting deal.
Yeah, that's a great example. And the focusing questions, he takes those into the next part of the truth, is the success habits. And in the book, he includes several different areas of our lives and questions to ask about those areas. So from financial to career to personal health, and focus on one thing related to those different areas. Let's see, what was I going to say? I forgot to mention at the beginning that I had attended a weekend retreat on this book. I know I talked to you about it when we met to prepare, but I love the book so much and all these principles, and I think it does take it a little bit deeper in some ways than Covey did back in the late 80s. But the thing on the success habits is that you have to start your day with success in mind. Start your day with habits. So I'm big on a morning routine that, if you're laying in bed and you hit snooze alarm 3 or 4 times and just get out of bed and wear the clothes that are at the, footstool at the end of the bed, and don't put any effort in, it's really hard to catch up all day. So start the day with success habits that lay the foundation for the rest of the day. So I don't think anybody be able to see, but I have them in my phone for, I get up between 5 and 6 in the morning, and I have my little bullet pointed list, and I go through that list every day, and I keep it in my phone, even though I know it. like kind of like an airplane pilot, they go through the same checklist. They don't just memorize the checklist, they actually utilize the checklist. So similar to that is the idea. And but do things on purpose, things like waking up early and exercising, eating something nutritious. He's big on meditation for self-centering. He talks about that in the book as well. So do things that cause you to be at your best before the rest of your day begins, and you have a better chance of accomplishing any of your goals. So I'm a big fan of that one.
Yeah, I think we're certainly aligned in that. Hey,
Yeah.
let's move on here to this idea of the path to great answers. And as I was reading it, I kept going back to setting goals, which, we've talked about that a little bit. But as I read this particular section, I think it was really more than that. And I read it a second and a third time. And he goes into the why and the what, and then the path to great answers is the how. And it's really building the plan and finding answers. Remember, we talked about big is bad. Well, what we're really saying there is big is good. So now if we're going to dream big, we have to figure out, hey, where are the answers? How are we going to solve that? And Keller spends quite a bit of time talking about his personal library. And this was illustrated for me. My daughter came into my office, which I'm in my home office now, and she had heard the term LLC, Limited Liability Corporation, in a podcast. And she said, Dad, tell me about LLCs. And I stood up, turned behind me, and I looked through my book list there, and I had my textbook from my corporate law class, where there was a whole section about business organization and business formation. And I thumbed through it, and I found the section on LLCs, and I handed it to my daughter, and I said, here you go, read it for yourself. But what he's really talking about is, where will we go to find answers? And whether it's reading, which is he spends a couple pages talking about that, whether it's mentors, whether it's other resources for information, but developing almost like a network, if you will, of sources of information. I think that's really what he's trying to tell us there. So definitely research and experience and mentorship are the places that I recommend. And that kind of wraps up, the second part. And then he's got a third part, which is where he closes the book. And he titles that Extraordinary Results. And he's got that broken down into 5 sections: live with purpose, live by priority, live with productivity, and then he calls it the 3 commitments and the four thieves is how he finishes up. And really, I think, he tries to kind of bring a bow, if you want to think of it, to the first 2 sections of the book, and does a pretty good part of that. So, he's got several associates here that I know anyway, that have sold businesses. And I always think that this is kind of an interesting part under live with purpose. One of my particular close associates sold a company about 10 years ago for 9 figures. And for those of you at home, that's over $100 million. And he had a non-compete. And so he had to sit out for a little while. And once he sat out, he came back, and he's since created 2 more companies. And both of those companies now are worth more than the company he sold. And He was sharing with me just last week, he was telling me this story, that he was having a conversation with the CFO of one of the largest protein companies in the world. And the CFO said to him, he said, how much money do you really need? And he was recounting the conversation, and he said, I'm not doing this for the money. And I think, it's always funny how the content for these broadcasts and these presentations come to you right when you need it most, right? And sure enough, I mean, it was one of those where, that's his purpose. That's where he gets his joy. That's where he gets his energy, is from creating things and closing deals and building businesses. He's not doing it for the money. And very rarely obviously this gentleman's got an infinite amount of money, but he never talks about doing it for the money. It's about building the relationships, and because obviously he has a very unique skill set and a very unique eye about how he approaches business. So, that whole living with purpose thing, I think, is very, very important. And I think we all kind of have to ask ourselves, what's our purpose? And that, again, kind of ties into that, know your why. Mm-hmm. So the next section is live by priority. And this kind of unpackages setting goals. And then I talked a little bit about prioritizing goals. So, I mentioned this thing about my daughter. She's young and early 20s, and I won't go too far down the rabbit hole of how I'm coaching her up to set goals. But, one of the fortunate things about this is that the goal setting process isn't something that's taught in business school. So you really have to learn it. And as I was reflecting on that living with purpose, living by priority, I thought about the purpose-driven life. Rick Warren was a pastor, and he wrote a book, and it was a good book. It was widely sold, and for a long time. I mean, there were church groups and personal development groups and study groups that were all built around Pastor Warren's book. So, living by priority kind of speaks to that one as well. The third section is live by productivity. And, this one has to do with blocking time. And boy, I've certainly wrestled with this one throughout my career. And as I was preparing, I thought, if I could do this myself, it would be great. But what I think I found, often my time isn't my own. And so you say, well, what do you mean it's not your own? Well, you know what? I report to a boss who reports to the CEO. And, those folks are the ones that ultimately control my time. And Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have got tons of quotes, and they're on record many, many times. And I think Mark Cuban, the guy from the Dallas Mavericks on Shark Tank, he's big on record about unproductive meetings. And you say to yourself, well, living for productivity, I don't always own my time. But so that goes back to the culture. And I think I made a note that at some point when we talk about culture, we'll probably reference this back and say, hey, what's the culture of your business relative to productivity? I didn't even throw it in my notes, but I was listening to Patrick Lencioni's podcast, and he has a podcast about the 20-minute meeting, if you've ever heard that one. It basically just talks about, hey, do you really need an hour for a meeting, or is everything that's really worthwhile to talk about, can it be done in 20 minutes? And within his organization, they kind of live by that 20-minute meeting. And one of his books is Death by Meeting. And I've given that to all of my direct reports and said, hey, I'm not saying you've got to do it exactly like this, but there's a ton of value in what Lencioni's talking about in the Death by Meeting. So
huge.
Yeah. The fourth section is called the 3 commitments. And I'll make one call out here that, Keller cites Dr. Gail Matthews, and he makes this about first making the commitment, I think, and that's, speaks to Cialdini's concept as well. But then he goes even one step further and says, if we have an accountability partner, we're even more likely. And in fact, he has statistics. He says we're 2 times as likely. So commitment, right? Commitment is putting it on paper, making a public statement, going on Facebook, but saying, I'm going to do this. If we think about it in a very simple terms, I'm going to lose weight, a New Year's resolution, or I'm going to run a marathon. Those are all public commitments. But then if you've got an accountability partner, it can be personal, it can be professional, the likelihood that you complete your commitment or your goal increases by a factor of 2 if you check in through your schedule with your partner. So, pretty good tips there, and they're pretty basic. First is setting the goal. The second is prioritizing them. And then the third is incorporating an accountability partner as well. Kelly, you want to take us through the 4 thieves?
Yeah, and I think they're important ones after the 3 commitments, and these will help you be successful. If you're aware of these 4 thieves, help you be successful through this whole process of goal setting for extraordinary results. But the first one is the inability to say no. So if you're saying yes to something, an interruption to someone else because you don't have the courage to say no to them, or to say yes when you will get something done for them, you say yes to them, you're saying no to your own commitment to yourself. So the inability to say no is a thief of your extraordinary results. Another one is the fear of chaos, because when you are sticking with your goals and your priorities, there can be chaos in other areas, and you have to let that be, and you'll get to that when it makes the list. The third one is poor health habits, and I touched on that when I shared about the success habits of starting your day successfully. But poor health habits affect our energy. And one sentence he said in there was, poor health habits rob our future, borrow from the future for the now. So that's something that kind of got my attention. I wanted to watch out for. And then the last one I mentioned before also was the environment not supporting your goals. An environment is your office, your desk, the physical environment, but he also talks about it as the people that you spend time with and places that you go. So if you have people in your life that are not aligned with who you want to be going forward and what you want to accomplish, that deserves some attention and some reflection on that. So those are the 4 thieves that will take away everything else that we work toward and that we've talked about working toward from this book. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, that really unpackages for us the one big thing by Gary Keller. So I hope you enjoyed that. Kelly, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate, a peek under the tent future dates, future times, future authors. So I'm going to turn this over to you here in a second to share that with you. For the listeners here, we welcome your comments. We welcome your feedback, suggestions on the broadcast, anything that we can do to make this the most valuable version of it that we can possibly do it. So, really the essence of this is about bringing value to you. As I think I've shared with you, I'm not pitching a book. I don't believe Kelly is. I'm not stumping for public speaking dates. This is really about what we can do to inspire the next generation of leaders and frankly, non-leaders as well, to really live your best life and be the best version of yourself. So, if somehow we can touch just one life, it's really worth it. And I make the statement all the time, and it's kind of a take on John Wooden. If we can change 1 degree every day in a short time frame of 180 days, we're moving the other direction. So I got a notebook from Rockhurst the other day as being the guest speaker, and there was a quote in there from Indian Jesuit priest Anthony DeMello, and his quote was, "On the day you cease to change, you cease to live." And I think you'll find that those words are pretty inspiring, and they're certainly true. So Kelly, you want to tell us a little bit about future titles and dates for everybody that's on the call today?
Yeah. So for our next one will be the 4th Thursday of January. So it's January 27th, and we're going to start doing them at 11 in the morning, Central Time US. So if you want to create a calendar reminder for yourself, the 4th Thursday every month at 11 a.m. Central Time. And next month, we're talking about Dory Clark's book, The Long Game, and it just came out in the last month or two. So we are excited to dive into that with you. And she's one of the ones that were mentioned in the book that Bret mentioned, The Master Mentors. And then the next month, we haven't picked our book yet, but February 24th. And you'll see on that page where you got the handout, it goes through all of them. And these are, like Bret said, these are no charge, and there's no expectation that you all have to read the books ahead of time. We will this year start preparing the handout like we did today to make it easier for you to follow along and hopefully identify some action items for yourself. So the whole idea is to help you continue your development as a leader. And then if you want to join the Voyage Consulting Group VIP list, I'll post that link next as a banner here. If you would like to join that is a way that you can get a monthly or so missive. And let's see here. Showing this one. There we go. Okay, that one's that's kind of long. Sorry about that. You also could join it by, I'll show this one, just going to voyagecg.com at the bottom of the page. That's the place to join the VIP roster. And I'll send an email to let you know what books we decide and the timing and the how to get access. And for right now, we're doing them on LinkedIn Live, and that platform could change, excuse me, over time. But that is what is coming up for us. And then I'm planning to do some additional interviews, conversations with leaders as well throughout 2022. And Bret, I don't think I ever told you, but one reason that I love that you just jumped all over the book discussions is I love to interview leaders and collaborate with leaders who have the experience and are real people. So that's what I really enjoy. And I think that helps people learn more and get more out of our time together. So that's my plan going into the next layer of all this. And I see another friend, Sydney, joined. Hey, Sydney, good to see you. But we can't tell who all is here, but if you post a note, we can see it.
Well, hey, I mentioned earlier, in today's broadcast, our purpose, our mission. And I want to share, I spoke last week to a group of graduate students, and then I received an email, sometimes I do, from a student in that group later in the week. And she opens by introducing herself, and I'll protect what's confidential. And then she writes, she said, "I just wanted to reach out to you and thank you for coming to talk to our class, because as the semester has come to a close, you were by far the most influential speaker for me personally." She said, "I just graduated in May with my undergraduate degree and went straight into earning my MBA in finance. I'm just trying to find my way before I enter the working world and hopefully start a full-time job at the end of May. I was wondering if you had any book suggestions for someone just starting out in their career, as I would love to read and learn as much as I can during this year business school. I appreciate your help." And I responded with a couple of titles that I felt would bring the most value to this young girl. and in her career where she was, and so people continue to ask me, and I get this all the time: why do you do this? Why do you guest lecture? Why do you do these podcasts? And you get an email like that, and you don't ask that question anymore, right?
Right.
When you get that kind of an email, it tells you why you do it. To be able to touch one life and inspire one individual to do something extraordinary or something different or make some level of positive change. I know me personally, that's what motivates, inspires me. So, we'll definitely continue to stretch. We'll definitely continue to grow personally. And I know Kelly's on board and aligned with me for that. But I really wanted to share, that particular message. So, I want to take this opportunity as we reach the end of our time here to say thank you for everybody for joining. Your feedback again is so important, and it's critical. I know we went a little long on time, and I hope that was valuable for you all. But feedbacks, questions, requests, comments, anything like that, we'll certainly do everything we can to respond directly or in an upcoming broadcast. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to kind of bring us to a close and bring us home. Kelly?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bret. Thank you for this journey this year, and look forward to collaborating with you in 2022. And keep the comments coming on LinkedIn, and feel free to message us or send us an email and share your ideas and however we could serve you best. That's our intention for this book discussion, and that's what we're going to bring into the next year. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in 2021. Thank you, Bret, and have a wonderful holiday and successful ending of the year, and get ready for a fantastic 2022. Thanks, everyone.